Jamie, thank you so much for joining us. Joe and I want to learn from you about grant writing, and our goal with this content is to help early career researchers or novice researchers really get started in writing their grants so they can do research as a day job. So that's what we want to learn from you about.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thanks. So the way we're learning a lot, is starting out asking people if you have any writing tips. So thinking about grant writing, but just the writing part. What works for you? How do you get words on a page? I know you're pretty prolific. Help us and help other people.
Absolutely. So I have been writing for many years, and I love to write. So not just grant writing, but creative nonfiction, essays, things like that. So this is something I do all the time, but it doesn't come perfectly easily. This is something that you have to be practiced about. So writing, the biggest key is to sit down and do a little bit every day. I have found that is what works. And what do I mean by that? It means finding your time during the day, whether it's that first hour of the morning or that last hour of night, sitting down and getting 500 words onto page and not worrying about what those words are.
Okay, let me ask you a question. Well, first I'll say, I also use 500 words. It's about one page.
Exactly.
A single spaced 8.5 by 11 page. That's 500 words. And I have heard advice before that, yes, you should write a page. My dissertation advisor used to say this. You should write a page of words every day, but it doesn't matter what the topic is.
Totally.
And he would say, write a letter to your mother. Write a letter to your mother. Or, write an email. Many of us actually write so much during the day in email. You could draft a long email, or you could write paragraphs of your grant. But some of it is just getting that discipline of getting from the top to the bottom of the page in complete sentences.
Absolutely.
Can you say, is that, because...
That's exactly my approach. I think that it's the act of getting your mind focused on the page and getting words onto the page. It doesn't necessarily have to be on a specific aim or your current grant, like you said.
Is that how you ended up writing topics about whatever,
So
non-grant topics?
Absolutely. Just last week, I wrote an essay, sat down and wrote an essay one morning because that was the space that my mind was in to do creative writing. But it's a practice where twice a week I have time scheduled out for myself. And for me, that's first thing in the morning. I work best from about 7 to 10. I block that on my calendar and I go.
Yeah. Actually, you bring something up that I'm going to tag for us is I read this book. Now I don't want to say the wrong title. It was The Power of Full Engagement. And it really is the short answer of the book is manage your energy, not your time. And so what this author recommended was find your best thinking time. And if you are a morning bird or a night bird, or you like to have your belly full and write right after lunch, like whatever, that's the time you protect for that work. And so actually, it's interesting. I mean, sometimes you can't and you just have to fit it in.
Yeah.
But if my best scenario is early morning for thoughtful work, so I try to give myself that time and I try to keep meetings away from that time because that's really high value writing time. And I know that I need a little pick me up in the afternoon, and being with people is energizing to me.
Absolutely.
So I will try to have afternoon meetings with people because it gets me going again. But it's interesting to hear you know when you think or write best, and you pick that time accordingly.
I pick it and I protect it, like you were saying. So, I have blocked it out on my calendar 3 months in advance. I have 2 days a week, every week. That is my writing time. And protecting it is really important, turning off those distractions so that you can fully engage in what's in front of you. It's really helpful. And I've made it my time. I get my cup of coffee, I brew myself a pot, I have it right next to my desk, and I go, and I love it. It's turned from something that could have been a chore a long time ago into something that I really cherish looking forward to every week.
When you show up to these laid out blocks of writing time, do you prepare for them at all, or is that just the time where you roll?
That's the time where I roll. And that's kind of, like I said, where I've noticed that my brain is most creative and kind of makes connections best is that time of the day for me. So I will show up with sometimes an idea, sometimes a deadline, others not, and I just get going.
I think it can change with your life. I don't know. I mean, This is my former little child, now big man child. But I do remember I needed morning time, but the kids had to be up for school. So I had to go even earlier than them. Yeah. And, sometimes 4 in the morning was like pushing the limits of what I would consider like trying to wake up and write. But, you kind of have to adapt.
Totally.
Depending on what your life stage is. Sometimes I get a second wind in the evening, and I love to write then, but then I'm tired in the morning. So, you just kind of play around with what's working for you at the time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do the same thing where I'll go back to pieces, and editing for me is a little bit easier of a task than kind of the creative process of getting things onto the page. So I will save editing for other pieces of the day and the week where I can squeeze it in. I love to edit too.
I do too.
Yeah.
I do too. That's great. Any other questions? Oh, Jamie, one thing I wanted to ask, if you don't have any more questions about this, is sometimes when we're writing a grant, you're working really hard pulling things together. And of course, the final grant is usually pretty beautiful, right? Like some pretty good looking paragraphs covering the literature or writing about why something's important. And sometimes even if the grant doesn't get funded, what I consider success is that you think, well, it's not lost. I'm going to somehow take this text and either turn it into a different grant or use it for a paper, a peer review paper. And I've done that before when I had a grant, it wasn't going to happen, but I ultimately turned it into a manuscript, and it made me feel better anyway, that it was not lost. Can you talk about how you try to make use of everything?
Absolutely. So I think you and I are probably kindred spirits because I don't like to let anything go to waste either. So whenever I'm writing and working on a piece of a grant, I am thinking about how I can take what I'm doing, the topic, the content, the actual grant itself, and turn it into some other type of work product in parallel, whether that's getting it out in manuscript format or something else. So for example, one of the things that I will talk about with fellows who are starting kind of research projects and may not have a real long, robust publication history yet is they start writing up their grant ideas, their specific aims. Let's turn that into some type of a piece that they can actually get authorship on, maybe show authorship with the growing mentorship team. So, if somebody is writing down their aims, I'm encouraging them to take those aims and turn that into a viewpoint. This is the call to action for what needs to happen around this gap in the science that I have identified. And then what do we need to do kind of at a high level to make progress on that gap? And that's the plan, the 5 bullet points in response to that call to action. And you can publish those. And you can publish those with mentors or people from other institutions who maybe you need as part of your team down the road. It has been a really helpful way to get some early publications out for so many of my fellows and junior faculty that I mentor.
That is some real wisdom there, because sometimes people are writing the grant and they say, I can't possibly write a paper, I'm working on a grant. And okay, you do get really immersed in grant thinking. It is different than writing a manuscript. And yet that publication that documents the reasons you care, can be so materially important to getting funded. And it really isn't going to take you out of the zone too much if it really is just a longer form narrative of what you're trying to boil down onto your one page of specific aims. And you get double duty because you co-author with your mentors. So it shows that you have a team and you can produce something together.
Absolutely.
It puts your name in a thought leadership position on the topic you care about. And then we always tell people, use keywords, title that paper, not something too obscure like thoughts from the top or something, but, a call to action on children with complex care needs. Something,
Totally.
So,
And if you can sneak a figure in there or a table or something you can leverage kind of down the road, perhaps your conceptual model, all the better, because then you can drop that into grants in the future as well. So to your point, I actually, in my own kind of, application for a K Award, I submitted a grant and it was scored, but it was not funded the first time. And in the process of doing that, I put out a perspective piece that was my 3 specific aims and my call to action around what needed to happen. And you know what? That program officer saw it. She called me. I didn't reach out to her. She called me. She saw it in JAMA Pediatrics. After my grant was scored, reached out to me, and we talked, and we had a great conversation. She considered me a thought leader, and you know what? She went back to the council meeting and advocated for me, and I got my grant. So, just a small measure.
True story.
Yeah, true story.
Wow. Wait, so what are you just talking about? A list of what is this paper you're talking about that you were?
That's a great question. Yeah. So these are kind of lightweight papers, meaning 1,200 to 1,500 words. So a couple of pages. And typically, what I will do is pick a topic which you're going to write around. Maybe it's kind of where you've identified the scientific gap is. And you state the problem. You say, here's where we are as a field. Here's the problem that we're facing. And here's what we need to do about it. 3 to 5 bullet points, a figure, a conceptual model, something that shows that you are developing expertise in this field along with your mentors, and you've got a plan on how to move the field forward.
Can you remember, it hasn't been that long ago, but just to be specific for Joe and other people who are trying to make sense of this, because you are giving really, really good advice. I know you don't have to remember your exact aims, but you remember the basic problem.
Yeah.
Could you explain it?
Absolutely. So I am focused on children with medical complexities.
Because you're a pediatrician.
I'm a pediatrician, so I take care of children with special health care needs and oftentimes really complex medical conditions. So a lot of those children use medications as part of their kind of daily therapies, to the point where some of them maybe take 10 to 20 medications per day. And we need to start thinking about safety issues related to their what we call polypharmacy or use of multiple medications. So for me, this was something that was very well established in geriatrics. So in kind of medicine for older adults, polypharmacy is just about everybody. In pediatrics, I am thinking about less than 1% of all kids and a very small slice of them that have this significant polypharmacy. So for me to get buy-in, for somebody to pay me to do work there, I needed to make them aware of the problem. I needed to publicize why this was an issue, why it should be important to the NIH. So that's what I did. I, for example, with this perspective piece, said we need to improve medication safety for children with medical complexity. This is a big problem. Here's why. Paragraph thinking about why. And then here's where we need to go to solve some of these things. We need to understand who it's happening to, how frequently it's happening, what drugs are involved, who manages those drugs, all those types of things you can raise as points.
Right, you don't have to answer
You don't have to answer them. Yeah, you can ask questions.
And do you do this before the grant or after the grant, or when do you write this up and who do you give this to?
Yeah, I did this in parallel with the grant just because I like to think about, okay, so maybe this grant won't get funded, or maybe it, like you were saying, won't go anywhere. What else can I do to get something out in the world to show that this is what I'm interested in? So I did it in parallel. There's a lot of people who will do it right after. There are some people who will do it before. Yeah.
So where did you release this document to for people to actually see it?
Yeah, great question. So the nice part about a lot of medical journals is that they have added these shorter form pieces, viewpoints, perspective pieces, commentaries, state-of-the-art topical reviews. There's a variety of names for them, but usually somewhere on the order of like 1,000 to 1,500 words, and they publish them. So
you submit it just like any other paper.
Exactly. Exactly. And so you submit it. Usually you can add somewhere on the order of 2 to 5 additional authors. So you can ask and invite some of your mentors or other people you're working with or other experts across the country. Hey, I just wrote this piece. Do you want to take a look at it? Give me some feedback, and hey, I'll add you as an author. It's a great way to build connections.
I can imagine that this smaller document is like a lot easier to interpret too. And it's just like, if you want someone to look over your grant and they see this, it's a lot faster, and obviously it caught someone's eye for you.
Yes, exactly. This is the magic of having a manuscript that is saying in longer terms what you're trying to say in like 3 sentences in your grant. So you can say, it's this, this, and this site. Please see this paper. And people who are interested in care will take a look at it, or they're already familiar with it. And that's how you help yourself along, especially when you're writing. Like Jamie's going to build a whole research agenda in the care of kids with complex needs. You can keep citing yourself. And so, especially when eventually you write a more complicated paper, you don't have room for all that in a grant proposal, but you can cite it. You could reproduce a table or figure from it, or excerpt from it. It reinforces multiple things. First, you get to save a bunch of words in your grant, and it gives the signal that you're serious about this. You can come up with an idea and bring it to completion. A published manuscript in a peer-reviewed journal is really valuable to the early career researcher.
Absolutely. And it demonstrates, I mean, even a shorter form piece is hundreds of hours of work, from start to finish. So it demonstrates a commitment to taking a topic, getting it onto page, working and collaborating with people who are experts, who are mentors, and then kind of getting it to final print format. It's a lot of work.
Right. That's really, really good advice. And, we talk about the aims page of a grant as the grant's master plan. Like, it's a 1-page from soup to nuts. What are you doing? People spend months writing that 1-page master plan.
I want to actually emphasize the months and months of revisions, because people are surprised that a 1-page document goes through 15 to 20 revisions before it's ready for prime time. It's a lot of work to get that page crafted.
So who are you giving that? Who is looking at that document?
So for I was kind of focusing on a specific aims page, but for looking at that document, it's a great question. For people who are beginning in their career, hopefully it's a mentor or a group of mentors, perhaps a writing group, or other people on campus
I was going to say
who
peers
are in similar kind of stages of their career development. But to your point, workshopping it is so important. Keeping your ideas too close, being too precious about them, and I've got to get the perfect idea down onto paper before I can release it out for anybody to see, including my mentor. It will slow down the best of ideas to a stop immediately. So I can't emphasize enough that one of the things I will tell early career researchers is get stuff down on the page. Don't worry about what it looks like. As long as you've got something that you can actually then email off or hand off to somebody, you're on your way.
Yeah, I've already learned from talking to researchers that I heard don't let perfection get in the way of progress.
Yeah.
And I've actually applied it in day-to-day stuff, and it's been so helpful.
Yeah. I give myself I don't let myself hang on to things anymore. I used to hang on to things too long and, I'll edit it once more tomorrow night and it'll be fine. Then I'll get it out the door. And now I say, I give myself that deadline. For example, if I write in the morning, like it goes out at the end. And I send it and I stay
That's
true to
great
myself.
accountability. That is really great accountability. I also think, you do. I think you practice sharing it with people. I mean, it is a skill. You're putting
Totally.
yourself out there. You're sort of practicing dealing with criticism, because even constructive criticism is criticism. Let's be honest.
And it
Somebody's
can
going to be
sting.
like, I don't know what you're saying here. I didn't understand this. And you're like, oh my gosh, I just worked for 5 hours on that page.
Yep.
But you need to know that, because it doesn't matter if it's perfect in every way to you. Somebody who's not you is going to be reading it. So it's super, super valuable. And, some people are better than others at giving feedback, and whether they're your office mate or another trainee or somebody a year ahead of you or a year behind you. Some people are just really good at it and highly constructive, and they can explain it and they see things differently. And you'll find, by practicing, sharing it with other people. And sometimes you're going to be like, man, you're so good at this. Could I do this for you? I would like you to keep doing this for me. So you kind of have little
Yeah.
collaborator posses forming, some who are just regular people trying to get grants just like you. And then, of course, part of mentorship is this person willing and able to help you get better?
Absolutely. I totally agree. And it is a skill. It takes practice, and it feels vulnerable to put your ideas out there and share them with somebody and open them up for feedback. But like you were saying, it makes them better in the end. And one thing that I can't emphasize enough is if you hang on to it too long and you get so attached to the idea, it ultimately becomes harder to change that idea. If somebody has great feedback, that perhaps we need to take it slightly in that direction.
Yes, let me emphasize. I want to build on that, because when we're thinking about the Ames page, literally you could spend a couple of months just writing one page. It sounds ridiculous, but it's actually not about the sentences, it's about the ideas. And so sometimes people will write their Ames page and actually it's 2 pages, and they'll actually have versions of different aims. They'll say, well, this is what I'm building up to, and it could be this, or it could be this, or aim 3 could be this or this. You're sort of like giving some options, because you haven't fully baked it. And it really should be treated as a living document until it's not, right? And sometimes Jamie and I will say, are your aims frozen? Which is like, at some point you have to stop tinkering with the aims. But until they're frozen, until your mentorship team agrees, like, at least for today, this is what we're going with, stop messing with the aims. It should be really treated as like kind of anything goes. And so it's really out there to further refine. And sometimes you have something you love, you can keep it, just you might not keep it in this grant. So you pull it to a different document or have a notebook for your ideas and hold on to it.
Speaking of not getting stuck on one page, are you ever working at multiple Ames pages at once, or multiple grants at once?
Absolutely.
Just to like stay fluid and not get stuck.
Yeah, so I think for earlier stage investigators, maybe not multiple Ames pages at once, but multiple Ames. And when I say multiple Ames, like you were saying, Anne, we're typically focused on 2 to 3 that end up in that final draft, depending on the scope of the grant. But people will, during that process, generate a dozen Ames, a dozen ideas. And those are the things that I say, take those, and once you've frozen them, take all the rest, trim them, put them in a file and don't lose it. Go back to it in the future, because you've got great ideas in there. It may not be perfect for that grant, but use them. For people who are a little bit further on, who are starting to build research programs where perhaps they have multiple types of research questions happening at once, yes, you are writing multiple sets of aims that may be different, they may be complementary, they may have nothing to do with one another. And it's really important, again, at that stage, you need to be able to keep them kind of partitioned, organized, and be getting them out to the people that need to give feedback. Because when you've got 3 balls in the air juggling, you can't do it all.
Right. And I think that's the higher order skill. That's what happens as you advance. It starts out, it's like the grant is your development, your idea, and you have a mentorship team, but they're all your helpers. But it's all really about this guy and your ideas. But as you advance in your career, you have projects that are much bigger than you. And now you've got a team and another team and another team. And you're contributing something unique and special. But if you're holding on to something, you're slowing down the whole team. So a big part of the work is like, I don't want to be the sort of block, right?
Exactly.
You're always thinking like, how can I do my part and push it back? My goal is always to get it onto somebody else's desk.
Mm-hmm.
That's always the game. But it's a change in how you work, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I tell my mentees, like, I don't want to be the roadblock in kind of where you need to go. So you get me what you want feedback on, tell me when you need it by, and I will get it done, because you need to keep iterating, you need to keep working, and there's absolutely kind of timelines to that.
Yeah. And I want to build on something you were saying, Jamie. When you're working on your first aims, your aims page for your grant, that's short for specific aims page. And in almost every federal grant, it is prescribed, it will be one page. Like, it must be on one page. And most people are working very hard to keep it on one page, because you can go on and on. But, typically we say, how many aims should there be? One of our mentors says, 3 is the magic number in fairy tales, in life. Like 3
Yep.
is magical, so it would be 3 aims, even if it's a 5-year grant, with a small corollary that if it's a 1-year grant or a 2-year grant, you could make a case for 1 aim or 2 aims. But typically for a big grant, no matter how big, it's 3 aims. And yet, when you're writing and you're trying to figure out what is this grant going to be about, our mentor, Alan, says write 7 or 8 aims. Mm-hmm. So you should actually have a big list of what comes next. Each one, if you did this successfully, what's the next question to answer? What's the next piece of this puzzle? So if you don't get your first grant, which most of us don't, and you're waiting a year to resubmit, maybe you go ahead and do aim 1.
Yeah.
And then your grant that has 3 aims, you just roll it down to the next one. Maybe you pick up aim 4, becomes aim 3. So you know what to do as you're growing and you're showing that you're getting this idea advanced until you get funded. Does that make sense? You got to know where you're going. Now, one thing that we had talked about, Jamie, is we're helping people think about what do they need lined up to be ready to write a grant. We've had a lot of conversation about aims pages. Yeah. But what else besides a 1-page idea and a mentorship team do you think is very either must do or very helpful if you're going to be ready to write a grant?
So if you've got that aims page and your mentorship team in place, absolutely important is scheduling yourself out for the next 3 to 6 months to be able to write that grant. And you take that submission date, in 6 months from now, and you've got to work backwards on all the different components of the grant that are due. And I typically recommend actually assigning due dates to them for yourself. And that's probably best determined in partnership with your mentors, because there are some pieces of a grant that are mindless to write. They take less time than others. So those are types of things you can save until the very end, kind of when you're in the last minute stages of getting the entire grant compiled. There are other things that are really key up front to have done that your mentorship team should be able to advise you on. And those are the things that you've got to really, again, lock to due dates and hold yourself accountable.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so some of readiness is almost like a checklist with a timeline, and check with somebody who's done this before to get the timelines lined up, right?
Absolutely.
Now, you said something that I don't think we've brought up before. How long does it take to write a grant? You said 3 to 6 months. I agree with that.
Yeah, so I think it depends on the style of grant that you're writing and the funder and kind of the scope of the grant. But for a career development award for research junior faculty or a fellow level researcher, for a K award, I really think you need about 6 months of 50% time devoted to writing.
Minimum. I would say 6 to 9.
Yeah.
6 to 9. Partly to recognize that it takes time to refine these ideas. And we've talked before, these mentored career development awards have a training plan and a research plan and a mentorship team. And you need all of those to align. And it takes time as you're refining to get all that lined up. And 9 months is very realistic, honestly. You will not put together a career development award in 3 months. Will not happen. It would be hard to even resubmit in a 3-month time frame.
3 month may be more like a smaller pilot grant where you're writing that one aim.
Does time ever turn into a big issue?
I think time is the issue
Okay.
for almost everybody.
What are some other issues that you have run into when it comes to writing grants?
So, to build on other things that are necessary in an issue, I think it's also necessary to reach out to the funder and the program officials or the people who are in charge of administering the grants and have early discussions with them. It's something that I think sometimes people get a little bit nervous about doing and may hold back, but it has been really beneficial to, for example, reach out to somebody in the institute at NIH that you're interested in submitting to, talk with them, hear about what the priorities are, give them your aims page even. They'll get on the phone with you or on the Zoom now for 30 or 45 minutes and give you feedback. And that's about the most valuable feedback you can get.
Yeah.
Well, actually, to build on that, I often say you're not ready to write a grant until you've talked to your program officer. You're not ready to talk to your program officer till you can send them a draft of the aims. Yeah. So again, that's a little higher stakes than sharing it with your mentorship team. It could still change, but you want a reasonable snapshot of what you have in mind, because talking to somebody like, I want to do this. Look, a grant is a written document. You've got to be able to write down your map of your master plan. And then the program officer can have a good conversation with you. They'll say things like, oh, we don't really fund this type of research. Or, there's another agency that's really interested in this. So for instance, you're working in cancer. Well, we have a cancer institute. But what about people who are doing cancer studies among older adults with cognitive decline? Well, there's a National Institute of Aging. So would aging fund that research, or would the National Cancer Institute fund that research? You really need to talk to both.
Okay, so before you spend however long writing a part of the grant that you're ready to submit to these people, or even just talk to them on the phone about it, how do you know what they're looking for before you do that to not waste your time?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, for example, if we're talking about NIH, or the National Cancer Institute, they put out requests for funding. So they will publish kind of what they intend to fund and the topic areas, even down to specific types of studies or specific ideas, specific populations of patients or people.
Some of those are called either program announcements or requests for applications. And some of them are beautifully written, and they can give you a lot of ideas. First, about how they're thinking about a problem. They'll cite literature, and you're like, ooh, this is what that funder says is the way we're going to think about this. I need to know that. And then they'll often say, here are examples of studies funded under this mechanism. And they'll give you a number of bullets, and they'll say, or anything else like this. But you can get a flavor for what they might find interesting and acceptable. And it's all publicly available.
Yeah, so you can get it on the internet, no problem. And they give you a lot of language that you can borrow and kind of put into your grant too that may align what you're doing with that institute.
So let's say you have an aims page or a direction you want to head, and you talk to this funder and they're like, we don't really do that. We don't really like where you're headed. Do you ever just sort of turn around and go towards a different funder?
Sometimes closing windows are as useful as opening windows, because you don't want to waste your time writing, trying to target your whole grant to whatever agency, and they're like, yeah, either this isn't really where we're going, or we love this stuff, we have no money. Then you got to get creative.
Yeah.
And sometimes they'll be open about that, and they'll help you brainstorm. Because it happens sometimes, and that's the other thing, just because they have documented announcements where they say this is what they care about, it doesn't mean that's what they're funding right now. So it helps, but it's not a guarantee. You also want to look up, for instance, on the NIH reporter,
Yeah, absolutely.
what is being funded from that agency. You can search by agency and just look at every grant title that was funded last year.
And it's a really cool interactive tool where it'll show you at what universities, people that do similar, it actually matches to similar research based on the keywords you type in. So you can get a list of people doing things in your area across the world, gives contact information, it gives essentially their aims type pages for most of the kind of grants. And I've actually taken that and reached out to people. So when I was writing my most recent R01 grant, somebody at Vanderbilt had done something like this in the geriatric population that I wanted to do in pediatric population. I had no idea of who this person was, any of their work. I found them in an NIH reporter because got suggested, like, this person maybe does stuff like you. I reached out to this person, unsolicited, cold email. He wrote back, and he ended up helping me shape my aims page to a point where it got funded. So, utilizing those connections, people are really willing to collaborate. You just got to, make the connection, invite them to the table, invite them to share their knowledge, and everybody benefits.
Yeah, I would say people who do research for a day job do it because they really care about it, and they know how hard it is, and so they tend to be quite generous. They want to help other people. It's actually kind of a small business, right? Eventually you know everybody who does this, but it's like a thing, and you can reach out to strangers based on manuscripts or grants listed in the NIH reporter and end up with really great collaborators, and just it's good for both people, honestly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, Jamie, thank you so much. We really appreciate talking.
Absolutely.
We have you
Thank
back in the future. I think we could talk about this for days.
Well, thank you both. I really appreciate that. It was a fun talk.